Afternoon. So I think we might start now. So I'll just go through some preliminaries here. So hello and welcome to BAD Sydney Crime Writers Festival. I'm Mark Morri and I'm delighted to welcome you to the Dixon Room today, where we're going to talk to Deb Wallace about her fantastic book, which I actually helped write. So that's why it's so fantastic. First of all, we'd like to acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Aurora Nation as the traditional owners of this land. Pay respect to the elders past, present and emerging. So there's a few little housekeeping rules in the new world. So you have to social distance, which you're all doing. There's hand sanitizer at the door and just try and keep 1.5 metres apart. Can you mute your mobile phones, especially mine? My wife's got mine because I'm sure I always leave it on. And feel free to share on social media at Bad Crime Sydney, hashtag, well, whatever. Anyway, I'm not really up on all that. So we're going to start now. We're going to talk to Deb, who spent about 36, 37 years in the police force and obviously became quite high profile. So first I'm going to ask you a question. Did you ever think anyone would write a book about you?
No, actually, I didn't think that the story I had to tell would be of any interest to anyone at all, except maybe mum and dad, and they died. And when you approached me, it took a bit of convincing, I think, and it wasn't until you pointed out the positives of telling the story that I was convinced maybe there was. And the reason being really for me was not about it, and I think we spoke about it, it wasn't a detective story, it was just a story about a detective. And I think what sort of convinced me in the end was certainly knowing Mark for 30 years, because so I'd had trust in you that you would tell a story that was nice, warts and all as well, but also I had the trust in you and the way that you and I have been communicating over the years. So I knew that was great. And I've also read Mark's previous books and I like how he tells it. We tend to do cop speak, and it seems like a series police reports. And I thought, who'd want to read a lot of police reports? I don't want to do that. And from the books you've done before, Mark tells a nice story. He tells it which is what people have said to me who've read the book, said it's a journey. It's not a series of police reports. And I think to me that was important. But the reason I mainly decided was a couple of women in my career, when they heard I was retiring, sort of came up to me and said nice things like, oh, we follow your career, or we'd like to, do what you did, or things. And I thought, well, when I'm gone, whereas my door's always open or I'm always free to have a coffee with women coming through the cops, I physically wasn't going to be there to do that. So I thought maybe by writing a book, or Mark writing the book of that journey, if they can't get access to me, they can maybe read it and just take something from it to say, it's a great career, don't regret it, don't give up and keep going.
We didn't rehearse all that talk about me at all. Thank you very much. So let's go back and we'll start. Your early life was obviously in Westmead. And how did you decide to get into the police force? I think it was a little bit more, well, I've got nothing else to do.
Yeah, I come from a working class family and lived at a place called Westmead, and that's western suburbs of Sydney. And I have two older siblings who were 12 and 10 years older than me. And so I was the girl that came along and was sort of the apple of Dad's eye, but thought I had my dad wrapped around his finger. And my dad was a hard worker. He was a boilermaker by trade, but then worked for an electrical company, drove a taxi one weekend a week for a month, and then also cleaned a factory. So when I came home in those days, it was from Parramatta High School, sixth form, I wanted to be a travel agent. But my dad, I knew, would think, you've got to be joking, because, travel agent, what does that mean? So as was the rule in those days, as a female, you work for a government job because you can be secure and you can be there for life. So it was a case of, I went along, he got me a job where he worked, which was sort of the traditional way you often did things in those days, put in a good word. And then I knew after about 2 or 3 years at a place called Prospect County Council where I worked, that I really wanted to have a career. I didn't see even back then at 20 years old, I didn't see myself having a family. It was just something that I sort of knew, which has never changed. So I wanted to have something that was a career base. So I looked, and one day I opened the newspaper, and lo and behold, there was an ad for the New South Wales Police. And that's no unusual. They recruit cops all the time. But in particular, they had a paragraph about women are encouraged. Now, of course, that was 1982. And we know that we've celebrated over 110 years of women in policing. So women have been around a lot of years. but they weren't frontline until the late 70s. And that was where we were now coming into the sort of the new regime. And I'd like to take the time to acknowledge my predecessors who paved the way for us to go on the front line, because you can imagine that it didn't just come by accident. They must have paved that road for us to say, well, you know what, they're okay. These girls have done a good job, so maybe we need to integrate them into the main police force. And so I saw that as a great opportunity that I could take. And so that was the beginning. So yeah, I applied, and for some foolish reason, they took me.
Well, in writing the book, and we went back to that early part, and the actual process of getting into the police, just to be accepted to see if you could go, I found quite amazing, is that they'd send the police officers out to your home and interview mum and dad and the neighbours and make all these reports. And I think we found some of those reports way back then. And even then, I think they talked about the grooming of the young woman, who obviously took a lot of care. And I mean, really, the language now, I think there'd be all sorts of problems. But it did refer to you, obviously, they could see that you took care in your looks way back then, which became a feature of your career, I think.
Yeah, I'm world renowned for my bright coloured suits and my flowy floral dresses and high heels. And that wasn't a deliberate, I hate these days when we go to leadership forums or, and says, and some leadership gurus get up and I suppose I should premise to say Mark and I are pretty authentic. So we'll try and be as politically correct as we can, but we sometimes venture to the other side sometimes. And, they talk about brand me. And someone said to me when I went to a forum once and I was in a bright red suit, and they said, so bright coloured clothes are your brand? And I went, well, not my brand. I just like bright coloured clothes. So, of which I do have 94 suits, still in my wardrobe. They're like a shrine, and only one black one. So it gives you an idea. This is very subtle for what I would wear. But yeah, so I've always been a girly girl. So of course I was a bit, when Mark found these old records where I was interviewed by the police, and even back then it was an interesting comment. It said, that I took extreme, it was a sergeant interviews you to see if you're even, you're not a serial killer or something. And he said, and it was a comment, and said, took particular care with her grooming and her appearance, and her hands and nails were well cared for. Like,
he was maybe going to be a serial killer.
I thought, oh, okay. I'm glad I hadn't done the gardening or something that day. So
you did have a few problems with the uniform initially, didn't you? The first time you had to try and jump out of one of those police trucks.
Yeah, I think it was in those days they let us women join the job, and before when I came in, women had to wear skirts, which were probably totally unpractical. So now it's a case of we're letting these women in; they've got to be front line. So what's practical? So they came up with these things. I have to explain it for the blokes, called culottes.
Yeah, you did.
And culottes look like a skirt, but they're long shorts, a bit flary. And of course, my first job was out, because for 6 months, the girls weren't, even though we were front line, they tended to protect us a bit, because the blokes didn't really know what to do with these women. So they treated us a bit like their sisters or their wives. So it wasn't until 6 months in that I was actually now out on the road, my very first job. And my first place was Blacktown, Mount Druitt. And a call went over to go to the Stockade Hotel. Now, it was at Layla Park. Now, in those days, we're talking 1983, the Stockade Hotel was one of probably a number of hotels that had a fairly wild reputation, because they used to shut at 11 o'clock in those days and no one wanted to leave. So there was always the 11 o'clock brawl, either the Stockade or the Robin Hood or the Comb and Cutter. So this particular night, I'm working with the guru, the gun of the police station, the best crook catcher in the command, a guy called Senior Constable Paul Garner, and he was tough. Didn't smile a great deal, pretty angry looking, but treated us girls with absolute respect. And he was the most lovely man, but tough. People feared him. The cops and the crooks alike feared him. And I was working with him. And we're on our way. We get out of the driveway, and suddenly a call went over, 27-1, which was our area, brawl at the Stockade Hotel. So far, everything's, 40 blokes involved, no backup. Well, he simply looked at me and said, "We're dead. We're dead. We're about to be killed." And all the way there, he's telling me how we're going to be killed at this brawl. And in those days, our truck was an old F100, which were pretty high. And I'm in my culottes, and all I could think about was, firstly I'm going to be killed, but so what's going to happen after? So I get there and there's 40 blokes punching on. Well, he pulls up and he used to call me DB, not Debbie. He used to call me DB. Nice knowing you're about to be killed. So he gets his baton. He's used to it. And so all I could think about is this is the very first time I've gone to a scene, first there, brawl there, to him and I, front line, here we go. And all I could think about was, how do I get from the seat to the ground without falling? So I've hooked up, because you had radios and you had batons. So I've grabbed my culotte and I've ripped it up, bunched it together and jumped out of the F100. So of course now I'm not only looking ridiculous, I've got men mid-punch stopping. What the hell is that? What the hell? And of course then they go along, what the hell? Listen, hi Ghana, who is that? And they said, who are you, love? I said, oh, I'm a police lady. And they said, like a chick. And I said, well, yeah, like a chick. And they said, like a gun and shit. I said, yeah, I carry a gun. Oh, stop swearing, bloke. Stop swearing. This is a chick. Like, hello, love. It's lovely to see you. Well, after, they worked out, yes, I was a policewoman and I'm here and yes, I have a gun and yes. And they said to me, love, what would you like, love? What would you like, love? And because, and I said, I'd all like you to please leave quietly. I don't know. They said, love, no one's asked us that nicely before. Garner normally gets out swinging his nightstick. No questions asked, but look at you. Love, you know what? We're all going to go quietly. And you know what, love? We hope to see you next week. And off they went. Well, of course, we got back in the truck and Garner's looked at me and I thought, uh-oh. And he just looked at me and said, DB, you and me every Friday night from this night on. And so we did for the next 3 years. So, we might have been a little bit not the usual, but we got there. So
they said it was pretty easy to write the book because all Deb was told stories, and I was really just like her secretary, and did a little bit of editing. One of my other favourite stories was when you went to an armed robbery at a service station, and then you actually got to pull your gun after a suspect, but you also told everybody over the radio to watch out for this suspect. How did that play out?
Yeah, look, in those days, the armed robberies were, all that got held up in those days was, service stations, liquor shops, and there was more armed robberies in that area than you had baked dinners. It was just the nature of the beast. And standard uniform for an armed robber in the 80s was balaclava, usually white Anglo male, balaclava, sawn-off shotgun. And the console operators at the servos knew the drum off by heart. So we arrived. I'm with us in those days, as I said before, I worked with Paul Garner. We used to work with the sergeants, and the sort of system was, when an armed robbery call went over the radio, the two cars that had the senior constables, the action men on board, would go patrol around looking for the stolen car that was no doubt used, and the third car on shift would be the sergeant working with the female, and we'd go and get the details because it was seen as a lot safer. So we go there, and the sergeant said this day, I'll just stay here, go and get the details. And, and I'm, excited because I'm brand new. I've been in the cops like 3 months. So I walk down, the console operator starts like a machine gun. Come on, Constable, get your pencil out. Times are wasting. Felons are fleeing. Let's go. And he said, right, here we go. 2 males. Okay, tick. Yeah, that's standard. Sawn-off shotgun. Oh, tick. That's standard. Here we go. This is good. And he said, tattoos. One had a tattoo of a teardrop under his eye and one had a tattoo of a swallow on his neck. And I got a bit confused. I said, well, I'm a bit confused. He said, clearly, Constable, clearly, you're looking a bit confused. Like, get going, write this down. And I said, no, I'm confused because how did you tell they had a tattoo of a teardrop? And he went, Constable, these two weren't brain surgeons, let me tell you. They had balaclavas on, but they didn't pull them down. And as they got to the car, one yelled to the other, let's dump the car at Tucks Road, Toongabbie. So I ran back to the sergeant and told him. He said, oh, that wouldn't be right. They're just doing a throwaway. They'd be on their way to Penrith by now, but we better check it out. So off we go to Tucks Road, Toongabbie, which is a light industrial area with a creek at the back. So I said to Sergeant, oh, they probably won't be here. The Sergeant said, no, they won't be here. Sure enough, at the end of the street, there's this car, the same description as the one that was used in the armed robbery. 2 blokes getting out of the car. The sergeant said, looks a bit suspicious. I'll wait here. You get out, tell him to stop. I thought, I wonder how many constables he lost this way. Anyway, I get out And one of them, because bearing in mind the guy said they had a sawn-off shotgun, but I couldn't see a gun at that stage, but I saw one of them do a strange action. And he's hesitated, looked in my direction, and went like that, and then put the movement back down. Now, I've got my gun out, and in a very loud voice yelled, "Police, stop." And I think they thought, well, she's got no hope of shooting us. Have a look at her. Like, she's shaking like a leaf, and I'm sounding like, it sounded like, "Please stop." And they took off down the creek. Now, I ran back to the car. Now, the dilemma I had, if I tell the cops approaching that one of them had a sawn-off shotgun, I didn't actually see it. And the cops may be a little bit, full of adrenaline and thinking, oh, they're chasing armed offenders. What if they shoot first? The cops will be in all sorts of trouble. The other hand, if I don't tell the cops that one of them might be armed, they will be unprepared. So in those days, they used to teach you to speak into the radio really calmly, no matter how hysterical you feel. So I said into the radio very calmly, and we had a whole radio station that covered the whole area, the metro area. And I said, "Radio, further to the description of the two offenders, they've decamped." I don't know what that word means, but I think it means ran off, but they used to teach you that. "They've decamped along the creek towards Toongabbie, and one of them had something long and hard in the front of his pants." Well, the sergeant just looked in my direction, shook his head. I'm thinking, why the hell do we let these women in? A few moments later, a dear colleague who trained me for my first 6 weeks, Ronnie McGowan, Ronnie, came over there. "Ronnie, Deb, it's Ronnie here." "Yes, Ronnie, just heard what you said." "Yes, Ronnie." He said, "In fact, the whole of Sydney has just heard what you said." He said, "Now I'm going to ask you a question. I want you to think carefully this time before you speak." "Yes, Ronnie." He said, "That weapon." "Yes." "Did you check to see if it was cocked?" Well, of course, cat cries come over for the rest, though. I think my credibility was... So I was probably... When my dad sort of looked at me when I was saying I was going to join the cops and said, "God help him," I think maybe those moments were coming true in those first few months.
Of course, you're in at Blacktown, and you were in uniform for a while there. But then there was the murder, I think, that most people who follow crime remember. That was the Anita Cobby murder. And I had a bit to do with that as well. But I remember you were actually chosen to actually help out and walk and reenact Anita's steps as they tried to get publicity. And that became that moved you on into the detectives world, didn't it?
Yeah, it changed my life in two ways, that moment, and it became about a bit by accident. It was Graham Rosetta, who was the officer in charge of the investigation at a local... He was based at Blacktown, and he was a legend in the cops. He was tough talking, a bit like Columbo in a way, didn't wear bright suits.
A lot scarier than Columbo. I remember him.
I
don't know why they called him Rosie, because he was, more...
Well, he was
nothing like a flower. Yeah.
No, he had a shock of black hair, had a death stare that could freeze criminals in their wake, like just stop, And he had this really thick black hair that when he furrowed his brow, his hair came forward, and when he would relax, it would go back. And I remember him giving evidence in the witness box where juries were mesmerised by this hair going forward and back, and maybe go on with it. And but the most brilliant man, so honoured to have worked for him. Anyway, most people probably realise that most murders are committed by people known to the victim, and I think they work out about 90%. And often in most of those murders, whether it's an associate, a relative, or someone they've come across, they're the ones the cops will often solve fairly quickly, or they know who's done it. They just got to get the evidence. It's the random murders, the really difficult ones, and unless someone from the community comes forward, they're not going to be solved. And Graham, I think, had worked out after about the second day, when the media was saying, "Well, you're not feeding us stuff to keep it alive, we're going to have to sort of reduce our coverage." And he knew that once that happened, it would go cold. So with that dilemma, I think, that was facing him, he's walked past me. I was a uniform cop, and I'm answering the old Sylvester's, for those who don't know, those old switchboards you see on the movies with the cords. And I'm answering it, Blacktown Police Station. And he stopped and he looked at me and said, "Wallace, how old are you?" And I said, "25, Sergeant." He said, "How tall are you?" And I said, 5'8". He said, "Yeah, I think that'll work. Come with me." And he went up, took me up to the detective's office, and he said, "I've got an idea. It's a bit kooky, but I think we need to do it to keep the media engaged as a bit of a publicity stunt. And that was to dress me up in clothes similar to what she wore, and then do the reenactment of her last few hours, which was the murder happened on the 2nd of February, 1986. So I got on at Central Railway Station where she had finished having her dinner with her girlfriends, and then caught the train out to Blacktown. And at a point in time, Graham had said to the media, you need to drop off now, and she needs to do things for us. And that was to walk the route they thought she had walked because of witness statements about where they heard a scream or saw a car. And so I did that. And later back at the police station, in the car park that night, Graham looked at me and very serious, as he often was prone to do, and said, "How would you like to be a detective?" And I thought to myself, gee, I must have walked good on that train. Now, he didn't know whether I was ever going to be a detective, but he allowed me the opportunity to stay with him and his team. And I love those guys in uniform. They were the most beautiful team. But what I saw when I worked with Graham was another level of tenacity, passion, commitment, hard work. And I thought, this is maybe where I would fit. This is maybe my culottes won't come into play too much. I can get my bright coloured suits out. And so from that moment on, I became into the world of criminal investigation, of which I remained till I retired. But of course, the other side of that was the personal side, and that was to meet Gary and Grace Lynch and to be part of their lives until their deaths, and to see the humility, humanity, and the resilience. One thing I took from Gary and Grace over those years was the strength of their character. And when I had a bad hair day or my pants didn't fit, I'd think or talk to Gary and Grace about how they got through life following such a tragedy that, no doubt they never ever really got over, but made a very traumatic situation into something very beautiful with the homicide victim support group.
And that's what started, as you said, your career. You never went back to uniform apart from the odd official function. You kept wearing your jumpsuits or whatever. What are they called?
Not just. He called it a jumpsuit, yeah. Girls, and I'll talk to the ladies. A jumpsuit is something you wear when you're jumping out of a plane. It was a pantsuit.
Right. I know we had to correct all that quite often in the book. I just had jumpsuit for some reason. But then you actually worked at Cabramatta. I know you did some other work, and Cabramatta, I think, to me, is one of the most underplayed, most violent eras that Sydney's ever seen. I think, and part of that, I believe, was the media. We, at that stage, it was very Anglo-Saxon. I think we had Vietnamese people who were very insular. They were chopping each other to bits out there. It was really the wild, wild west. And you were right in the thick of that, weren't you? And you got to meet, well, the 5T gang, who are probably still be one of the most bloodthirsty Sydney's ever seen. So do you remember, and that's where Father Cruz, wasn't it? You used to go and have some funny stories about the authority of the young guys. Like, they'd be killing somebody, but I think you locked up 3 guys got in the back of the car one day. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, it was a really surreal, as Mark said, it was a surreal environment. I went from Blacktown, Mount Druitt, where everyone was Anglo. The cops were Anglo and the criminals were Anglo, and everyone was called Wayne. It was very civilised. Every crook you locked up was called Wayne. In fact, I thought that, probably politically incorrect, but if people stopped christening their kids Wayne in the 80s, we would have cut the crime rate by about 80%. So, and in fact, a principal, I said that to someone once, and a principal from the North Shore said, pick me up on it. I was doing a presentation at one of the schools on the North Shore, and he said to me, that thing about Wayne? And I went, oh, he's going to have a go at me about being, that's a bit politically incorrect. And he said, it's the same over here, but here they're called Dwayne. So I thought, okay. So of course I get to Cabramatta, and it was raw. It was the Wild West, as Mark said. In fact, we used to write, it sounds awful, but we used to write off murders by intelligence reports. In other words, we're never going to solve this one. We'll just write it off because everyone was in the toilet. No one saw anything. It was, gang on gang a lot of times. So there was a code of silence and all of that stuff that went with it. But there was also a code that the young gang members had as well, and that was a respect for authority. It sounds weird. Here they are macheting each other and killing each other in the streets. But they had a respect for authority, and it was they say things like, you're not our enemy. Our enemy is people who come into our territory, take our money, or try to kill us. You're doing your job, and you do the crime, you do the time, and we will never give each other up. That's our code. But we do the crime, we'll do the time. And they had this rule as well, because they worked their way up through different street level crimes to finally realising that what's the best crime to do, and that's a crime without a victim. And what's that crime? Selling drugs. And of course, Cabramatta was at the time heralded, sadly, as the heroin distribution centre at street level in the Southern Hemisphere, the biggest marketplace, took over from King's Cross. And so, it was fairly lucrative on the streets. And but there was a rule, the 5T, who were a Vietnamese street gang, who ran the streets purely by their brutality and their size of numbers, although there was only, say, 30 of them. And that was that they would run the western side, which is really the busier part of Cabramatta, and they kindly allowed the Laotians and the Cambodian drug dealers to sell on the other side, which really had no customers at all, because everyone would get off the train and head west. And I was there one day walking. We do the run in the morning, which was to dig up the gardens to take out the heroin caps where the gang members would bury it, and the machetes out of the bins, which is where they kept their stockpiles. And as we're doing this, I saw a Cambodian kid, and I said, "You can't be on this side because you can only sell on the other side." And he said, "No, I'm going to take my chances because I've got to make money. There's no one. I don't get any customers. I'm going to come on this side." I said, "Well, we can't be everywhere. There's only 8 detectives here. You're going to pay the consequences if the Vietnamese gang members find you." He said, "Oh, I'm going to take my chances." So we did our bit and went back to the station, and about 3 o'clock that afternoon, we get a call. Young Asian male in John Street, Cabramatta, is laying there with his throat cut. So we went up the street, and sure enough, here's this young Cambodian kid laying there. The paramedics are working on him and saying, "This does not look very good. We think he's gone, but we're still alive, barely. But we're taking him straight to Liverpool." So off he went to Liverpool, and there's these 3 gang members standing. They're all in there. They all used to dress the same, badly fitting microfiber black suits, white business shirts to cover up their tattoos, and all got the same long black hair. And they said, I said, "Oh, do any of you know anything about this?" "Oh, no, madam." "No," they used to call me madam. "No, madam." "Oh, no, but the boy looked very sick." I said, "Well, I think he's very sick. I think he's going to die." And he said, "No, madam, we not see anything." And my colleague at the time said, "Deb, have a look at their pants." And sure enough, as the sun was just going down, you saw these shiny sort of marks on the microfiber pants. And he said that, my colleague said, so switched on he was, said, "It's got to be blood spatter, and they've got to have been close enough to get the blood spatter." So, all right, Huey, Dewey and Louie, get in the back of the car. We're going back to the station. Okay, so they get in the back, and I'm about to drive off. And I hear screams from the back seat, "Madam, stop the car." So I slammed the car on. They said, "Madam, what are you doing?" And I said, "Well, I'm taking you back to the police station to interview you." "Madam, you can't drive." I said, "Well, yeah, that's probably what my father would say as well." And they said, "No, madam, it's not that, madam. You haven't got your seatbelt on." And I look behind, and they're all sitting there with Huey, Dewey and Louie with their seatbelts on. We're sitting up there, and no doubt just cut this kid's throat, but sitting up there with their seatbelt on. So I always say to people when we're about education in relation to don't use drugs, can it work? Absolutely, because it worked with seatbelts for these guys. So you'll be pleased to know we get back the next day. We got statements off these guys who said, "Oh, we just happened to be there and saw this boy." And I went the next day. You wouldn't believe it. How lucky was the guy, the Cambodian kid? There was a conference of vascular surgeons at Liverpool Hospital. They adjourned the conference and all came down and repaired him. And he was sitting up in bed the next day, like nothing had happened, with his bandage on. And I said, "Oh, we think we know who the suspects are. So, if you tell us who did it." And he just looked at me and said, "Oh, no, madam. Very sharp gutters in Cabramatta. Got to be very careful if you fall over." So we never got to charge anybody, which was not unusual.
It was, as you said, it's pretty interesting. You spent quite a lot of time out there, a couple of times, backwards and forwards, and then I think you did a short stint in internal affairs, which you actually ended up yourself being followed a couple of times. But
yeah, it was never a place I ever aspired to go to. And I know you needed oversight areas in any organisation, and I went there a bit by accident because the Royal Commission had information that I was corrupt. And so they went through me literally like a dose of salts, and then they realised I really wasn't corrupt. They found that out by the gang members supporting me in that, but also the fact that I lived at home with my parents and had no money because I travelled a lot and had a pretty bad-looking car. So the organisation then said, "Look, we're setting up internal affairs following the Royal Commission, and because we've had a pretty good look at you, we think you're pretty honest, so would you come to internal affairs?" And circumstances being unfortunately what was unplaying at Cabramatta at the time, I went there as an acting inspector. And I'm used to working in a team environment. that's what I've always had, commanders and bosses that have always been about, we work as a team. It's never about an individual. It's always together. And I got a bit concerned when I first went into internal affairs, because although you had your team, you didn't talk to the other team, you didn't talk to that team. And I was a bit concerned by this, because I thought, well, we're all one team, in fact, doing the same job. And I raised it with my boss at the time. And I said, if you don't trust me, then I shouldn't be here. And anyway, it worked out that we broke down those silos. But it wasn't until some time later that I was back at Cabramatta in 2001. I went back for a second tour, and I was approached by 2 investigators who said to me, how did you get on with your assistant commissioner? And I said, oh, good, I think. He said, really? Then why did he have you followed? I said, what? And I said, no, I was the follower. I was the follower. I did the following. He said, no, you were followed. I said, and surveilled for 6 months. And I'm looking at these 2 investigators. I'm going, what are you talking about? I said, oh, we're doing a review on that operation. Yourself, Assistant Commissioner Clive Smallland at the time, Peter Ryan, the Commissioner, were all being followed by this special group of police. I said, what for? And they said, oh, if they followed you to the gym where you went. I went to a little gym at Marylands, and they said, and they followed you for 6 months. And I'm going, these people deserve a medal. And I said, why? I said, watching me bounce around in Lycra for 6 months, they're clearly going to suffer from traumatic stress. Anyway, it turned out it was just simply a case of that the other team, once we broke those sailors down, I was realising the other team were targeting someone who went to my gym. So I said, oh, I think I know that person. And they said, when that person's there, can you let us know and we can set the surveillance up? And that was as simple as, but the paranoia was that I was...
There was a paranoia. Every cop, apart from about 3 who were running that group, thought every other cop was crooked.
Yeah.
And I mean, the fact that you had this police commissioner who'd just come over from England, who didn't know the name of Roger Rogerson, they thought he might have been corrupt, just shows you at the time there was this just amazing sort of atmosphere around the police force. It would have been a pretty bad time, I think, for everybody. So you were internal affairs, you moved out of there fairly quickly, and then there was the really first big profile that you started getting, although you did have a bit of that in Cabramatta, was when you became the boss of the Middle Eastern Organised Crime Squad, MEOCS. And I think pretty soon, straight away, one of the first jobs was the shooting of Fadi Ibrahim. So it was a bit of a baptism of fire, 5 bullets in his Lamborghini. But interestingly, doing the book with Deb was just full of wonderful stories, and and some of them quite sad. And we're talking about the Ibrahim case, and said they did arrest some guys actually who were planning to kill a gangster in revenge called John Macris, and so that was quite, you locked up these guys, and that eventually went to court, and the outcome was not great. But you said you were working late one night after you'd arrested these 3 individuals who were going to kill John Macris as revenge for shooting Fadi, when there was a message from downstairs, wasn't there?
Yeah, the team, this brilliant group of detectives that I was so fortunate to be their commander of, did an amazing job. And sadly, we didn't convict the people we charged for a whole range of reasons, I guess. But to this day, I in my mind, I believe I know who was probably responsible for organising it. But notwithstanding, that night I was late about 7 o'clock. It was a Friday night. I was with the team, and they just charged the last one, and we got a knock and said, "Oh, there's a delivery for you downstairs." And I said, "Oh, what is it?" We worked out of Hurstville Police Station, so it was the local cops came and let us know. I said, "What is it?" They said, "Oh, we'll bring it up." And I said, "Oh, all right." Thinking, I don't know, maybe some paper, it's arrived, some stationery, and it came cartons of Johnny Walker Black Label Scotch with I'm talking cartons. There must have been 200 bottles or something just on a trolley. They wheeled it on a trolley, and I said, "What's this?" They said, "Oh, it's just a delivery. And there was a card, and it was from "Thank you for all the great work in the investigation, John Macris." it was the potential victim. And I just looked and I said, no, don't go.
Also a drug dealer himself at the time.
Yeah,
So,
yes. And so I've gone, hang on. I said to this guy, and of course my team's gone like, bees round honey. You can imagine, oh my God, this is great. And I've gone, no, stop, to the courier. I said, you can't leave it. And they said, but my job's just to deliver it. And I said, oh, no, don't even let it come in the door. Like, I've just got out of internal affairs. I'm going to go back there for the wrong side. So we sent it back, but of course, the boys said, what about just one bottle and we'll put it in the gift register? And I said, no, I said, it's got to go back. But yeah, well,
very different police force in 2009 compared to pre-96. Yeah. That would have actually been ringing up John Macris and asking for a few more.
Yeah.
So yeah, the Middle Easterners, it was a pretty wild time. Again, those guys were incredibly violent. I think that we had the Brothers for Life. But there was one moment which obviously is one of the saddest parts of your career, and that was the shooting and death of Constable Bill Cruz. And you were the commander of that at that time. Now, I think for people who don't know, I think you should maybe mention that Bill Cruz was a young guy, just joined MEOX, and they were going out one night on a fairly ordinary, routine sort of operation to do a search warrant and try and lock up some crooks. And things seemed to go a bit wrong, didn't they, Deb?
Yeah, it's probably, one of the things we often ask in your career, you look back after 37 years, and one thing I think a cop joins, particularly when you get a command, is that what you hope to get through in your career is one of your staff not getting injured. That's the ultimate, of course, and that you don't have to face a colleague dying. And on this occasion, we had the double whammy. Our colleague got shot, but the fatal round was from a friendly fire, was from a police weapon. And there's no script on how to manage that. And as Mark said, to put it briefly, they were we did Middle Eastern criminals. That was our job. We targeted Middle Eastern criminals. And on this particular information came in that very reliable information, and that two Middle Eastern crime families, one was going to collect drugs, one was going to collect money, but they used a broker, which was an Asian, middle-aged Asian, at a block of flats at Bankstown. And we had an informant there with the Asian who was giving us live information. Didn't know who the Asian was, but for all the reconnaissance they did, he was a middle-aged man with a family and etc. So we did the operation. What we didn't know, though, was that he had been ripped off by some Middle Easterns a couple of nights before, so he was a bit paranoid. He said that he thought that when the police raided that they were fake police, and sadly he came out firing at what he thought to be fake police. He hit young Bill Cruz, who had been in the cops 3 years but only with us 3 weeks, hit Bill in the arm. Bill bravely dropped his equipment, pulled his gun in his wrong hand and returned fire, but was really quite badly injured in the shoulder. His sergeant or acting sergeant behind him returned fire to the Asian. To this day, we'll never actually know what happened, because even, ballistics probably can't tell you, but what we do know is that the police round hit Bill in the neck and of course caused the fatal injury. And from then, of course, the story untold over many, many years of tribunals. But it was probably the darkest time, both to lose one of your own, but then to balance that with to providing welfare and support to the office who never fully recovered emotionally. Although he did come back to work, we were very proud of him that he came back, as did many of that team. And sadly, we lost him after about 6 years from the cops, and then lost him permanently when he died last year from stage 4 lymphoma at the age of 49. So it was a tragedy played out over from 2010 until last year.
And one of the officers there, I remember, was Dave Hughes, who worked in MEOX. And again, in writing the book, you got amazing insight into the police, and they do share some things with journalists and a lot of emergency services, and it's the gallows humour. And I even found that with what you were saying, Dave Hughes, who Brian, and when he had to go into hospital, he was getting surgery. And what did he say? You were there going in there, and you've got to remember the highway patrol guys are the uniform guys who have this kind of war with the detectives. There's a bit of a class war.
Absolutely, absolutely.
I mean, if you, when you're writing a story, and if you leave off, if you say Sergeant Bill Smith, and he's been a designated detective. That's the only time I'll get a copper ringing me up
Yeah.
to say, hey, mate, you forgot, I'm Detective Bill Smith. Not Sergeant, I'm Detective Sergeant. But Hughesy was...
Yeah, Hughesy was the most special man in I've ever met, really. He was a sergeant in the Highway Patrol, which is special in itself, really. But he'd been at Fairfield for many years when I was at Cabramatta, and we were very close, and he was with me at Middle Eastern Organised Crime. We had a Highway Patrol component. And Hughesy Hughesy always had a 2-litre bottle of Diet Coke every day in the back of the highway car. That was his standard. And he had a little mark on the back of his neck. He kept scratching. I said, stop scratching that. It turned out it was a melanoma, and it spread fairly quickly and into his brain. But they felt that they could operate and get most of it. So he was going in to have brain surgery from the tumour. And he said to me, he rang me when he was about to go into surgery, Deb, before I go, because my wife won't bring it in, can you bring me my 2-litre bottle of Diet Coke? Because I want it when I get out. I said, yeah, sure. So went in, and he's sitting up large as life, and he's about to go into surgery, and they're doing all the pre-op stuff, and I'm there, and he said to me in a serious way, which was a serious, he said, Deb, if something goes wrong, I know we've been friends for 20 years. I trust you. Don't leave me in a vegetative state. Make that decision if no one else will. And then, so that was the serious time. And as he's getting let in, though, he stopped and he said, Doc, I've got to say something. He said, if you do take too much, think of the positive side. And I'm looking, and he said, because I can always come back as a detective. Of which I quickly responded, Doc, I know this surgery's got a level of difficulty. And the doctor's looking at me, and he said, well, how do you know that? I said, well, he is Highway Patrol, and his brain is a little littler than anyone else's. Touche. And he did fine. He came through surgery. However, it spread, and I lost him 6 months after surgery to melanoma. So, another loss of a wonderful person, not just from the cops, but from this world in him.
As I said, talking to you about, there were so many funny stories and sad ones. But the Middle East, and you moved quickly, and then I think you had your highest profile position. That was with the gang squad. You quickly became known as the Gangbusters. But amongst all the stories, my favourite is when the guys had come to you saying that they wanted to go and recover a gun, and they wanted a search warrant. And they said it had to be done that night. And you were a bit reluctant, weren't you?
Yeah, especially after the Cruz thing. Normally do we search warrants in the morning, just the element of surprise and all that stuff. And the boys came to me, it was about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, just about knock-off time. And they said, oh, boss, we want to go and do a search warrant on the Gypsy Jokers. Now, the Gypsy Jokers are like a spent force, really. They're like where old bikies go to die, sort of the Gypsy Jokers. They're a real old sort of school, still the white Anglo male largely, so not really organised crime. And I sort of looked and I said, yeah, we want to go and we get a gun. They got a gun at their clubhouse. And I thought, oh, here we go again, clubhouse at night, but bikies, all those elements that are, leading up. I said, look, I'm not comfortable doing it tonight. Is there any indication they're going to go and shoot someone tonight with that gun? Or no, but it's just on the premises, which is often what bikies have in their clubhouses anyway. So I went, oh, well, can't we do it in the morning? They went, well, we can. And I said, well, let's do it in the morning. Go up, get ready, regroup ready tomorrow morning. I could see them like kicking stones as they walked out. And they walked upstairs. I can just imagine, because I could see now what they were thinking. Bit of overtime, you see, because if you do a search warrant, it normally takes about 4 hours, get a bit of overtime. They're all young guys with mortgages. So they go back up, and then they rang me and said, boss, we forgot to tell you something. We forgot to tell you something in the briefing. And I said, what's that? They're holding a female against her will. I went, you didn't seem to think to tell me that? So you told me about a gun, but you didn't tell me about a kidnapping. No, boss, we forgot that bit. I said, go, get out there now. Out you go, charge, boy. So yes, it's on. So they're kitting up and they're ready to go. And the risk was going to be fairly low because of the Gypsy Jokers. It was a clubhouse. They had caravans on it where old Gypsy Jokers could live, like a Gypsy Joker retirement village. So out they go. And I said, ring me because I, worry. Ring me as soon as you're in, make sure everyone's safe. Yeah, boss, no worries. So I get a call about 7:30. Boss, we're in safe and sound, no issues. Everyone's secured and we've recovered the gun. Yay. And the female. I said, hallelujah, well done, high-fiving. And they said, she'll be returned to her family as soon as the vet gives her the once-over. I said, the vet? What are you talking about? They said, oh, we forgot to tell you. The female is a female alpaca. And they kidnapped her about 3 weeks ago. I've gone, oh. But what was the best final part was that we recovered Cleo, the alpaca, returned to her family, and Channel 7, Robert Vardy, I think it was raced out there because, you know, they love stories with a bit of colour and movement. Here's the family hugging the alpaca, the cops handing over the alpaca, and Chloe always looked like she was smiling. And the best part was my colleague, Scotty Cook, who had been with for many years in Cabramatta, he was running the organised crime squad, and they just got a big bust of 6 kilos of cocaine. And I took him straight off the front page. So
everyone was a lot more interested in the alpaca,
yeah,
which had to have a lot of counselling after spending 3 weeks with the Gypsy Jokers.
Yeah, that's right.
And there was some other stories about that we won't go into.
Yeah.
But the bikies were, and that was the pinnacle of your career in many ways. But there was a philosophy about the bikies as well, wasn't there? Like you went in there. Up until then, I think the bikies had ruled this city quite well. I know you used to see hundreds of them, you know, riding around in their colours or sitting there, and that's now a thing of the past. And that's very much thanks to you when you took over, and with the guys from Raptor, who everybody loves now. It's probably the best brand New South Wales Police Force has. So tell us a little about like it became a concerted effort, didn't it? We really, New South Wales Police Force, with you and that Raptor, really went on the offensive around the time you took over.
Yeah, Raptor had been set up like many years before me, and my background was Middle Eastern and Asian, of course, and so I get to Raptor or to the gang squad, and you know, I learnt very early back in the Cabramatta days from the Asian gang members when I was trying to work out strategies to combat them. They said, you can't beat us unless you understand us. So I took that, and I didn't understand the bikie, so how was I going to even command this unit without understanding what they represented? So I got the experts in, who were mixtures from sergeants, constables, inspectors, who were amazing investigators. And I said, just tell me, what is it about bikies? Like, I have a view, like, you know, fat, over, you know, Anglo males, but that's not what these are. So tell me what these are and what do they do? And they told me. We wrote it up on a whiteboard, and I remember, you know, they're organised crime, so that they extort people, they're violent, they carry guns, they have clubhouses, they involved particularly in tattoo parlour industry. They've got, you know, a working model, so to speak. They like to hang out together. They go on national runs, and so we then thought about it and said, let's all go away and let's think about how we can not only stop the current ones, but how do we prevent people wanting to join them, which seems to be a bit of a romantic lifestyle for disenfranchised youth. You know, it's a fertile ground. So we went away and we thought about it, and we all came back to the same whiteboard, and we put a response up to each one. And those responses were based on a whole range of strategies, in particular using old legislation, asking for new legislation, doing a whole range of things, and being proactive, being really visible. If they're going to be visible, we're going to be more visible. Yeah, and so we took the visibility out of them to the point that the year that I left, last year, we were given an International World Award in recognition of the strategies that we were world leaders in their response to combating outlaw motorcycle gangs.
I think we've only got about 10 minutes left, haven't we? So I think people might want to ask some questions. If anyone got any questions to ask Deb.
Yeah, look, it's a good question, because people said, you know, and I got the baptism of fire in a way, because, you know, being busy from the cops, and then I retired in December, and then COVID came in March, and I think, now what do I do? So I was sort of nothing really for a while, but yeah, so I've discovered aqua aerobics, because when you get to my age, you don't do star jumps very well on land. So I can do tuck jumps and star jumps again. I do yoga. But for my own self, I'm still have a very, very strong relationship with Father Chris Riley from Youth Off the Streets, who's not very well at the moment. So we're spending a bit of quality time together. I'm doing Meals on Wheels, so which is fantastic. I'm going to get those suits out. I'm going to be the best dressed deliverer in the Lake Macquarie area. And I went on the board of the local workers club up there, because it's a really strong base. Still want to be involved with the community, and I'm still doing stuff with the juvenile justice detention centres in gang prevention programs. just the consequences of joining gangs and stuff like that. So that's keeping me busy.
I have obviously a Zoom question, and I think it's directed to you, not me. If your life was turned into a mini series, who would you like to play you? Which
I think it would be a very short mini series. It'd be a mini series. Oh, I have no idea.
Well, actually, there is some interest actually in perhaps making Deb's life a mini series, or at least parts of it. And my wife and I have decided we think Toni Collette would be perfect. For that, so
she's. I just watched actually a movie, a sort of a spy movie with her in it. Yeah.
That's what gave us the idea.
Yeah. Oh, Margot Robbie. Oh, well, I'll be flattered by that. I'll do a lot of makeup, won't she?
No one's asked about who would play me. No, that's all right. Telly Savalas has been dead a long time.
But so thank you for that. But yeah, for all the questions, for letting us come today.
Michael wants to.
Yeah, I think the average amount of time most people spend on police, it's not that much. It's less than 10 years, I think. Is it possible to generalise and say what qualities of character or attractions there are for people like yourself that stay longer?
Yeah, I think if I was, is just firstly.
Sorry? Michael was just asking for our Zoom people how Deb stayed in there for 37 years, and it doesn't seem to be the norm anymore. And just if you could expand it a little bit on what seems to have happened generationally now.
Look, I think there's no secret to it. We're all made up of different things, but I put it down to I was given a very pragmatic background, my family. And, my dad would always say, life isn't easy. You have to expect some knocks, and it's how you deal with those knocks is the testament. You have to pick yourself up and get on with it, because there's always someone worse off than you. So I think if I was saying the trait is to not take yourself too seriously, not to be overly ambitious, because it's a long time. If you're going to be in the job for a long time, you've got to enjoy every step of the road. And if you get that blind ambition, so if you just secure a job, you're not going to enjoy what you're doing because you're thinking of the next one. So I say it's about being happy in your job, and to me, promotion does not equate sometimes with happiness. It's doing the job you love and finding that job part that you love. And I've seen senior constables still to this day on the truck after 25 years who have had the best, most rewarding and happy career. And I've seen commissioners and assistant commissioners and deputy commissioners who, I'm sure, want to go and kick tyres at night. So I always say, live your career how you want. Don't be dictated by confusing promotion with success.
Okay. Right here. Do you think female police officers being something different or special to the policing role? Do you think they bring something at all? Which I also forgot to, the story about how you initially left the F off after every statement you had to make when you were a police officer and a female. But that's,
Look, I think we do. It's a bit like they're saying now, the talk around is in corporate Australia that by bringing women onto boards, etc., we bring a different dimension. And I think that's a bit like the cops. It's about being true to yourself, and it isn't easy because I think what we bring is our individuality. Because we're not bound, and it was once said by my commander, I'm not bound by doing the path that everyone's going to do because, like for like, and scared that if I don't do like for like, I won't get promoted. With the women, we often undersell ourselves, so we don't have huge expectations. We seem to be happy in the middle ground, which gives you the freedom to do what you want to do in a different way. It's about, the challenge is getting bosses. And I've been blessed in my career and to have bosses that have, right from the rank of constable through the rank of superintendent, well, probably more so in that middle ground of sergeant, to give me the freedom to explore and to try things. And so that's the challenge, is finding bosses that will give you the opportunity to explore different ways of doing things. Not always going to work, because, trial and error, but I think women do bring that richness because we're not bound by the way it's always been done. And sometimes you need to challenge that.
Right. Okay, I think we might be able to wrap up. Thank you very
you,
much.
everybody.
And thank you, Deb. Thanks a lot.